right, we are live here, and we have a very lovely guest. You guys might have seen his face pop up on the channel here and there. But for those people that are just wondering, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So my name's Lee. I'm from the Belcultassi podcast. Some of you may be more familiar with my previous channel, The Inner Guardians. We took a little bit of a break. In fact, it was about almost over a year away from podcasting, which is mostly to focus on other aspects and the formation of what we would call a C influence school of the fourth way. So I wanted to go deeper into that side of things. So I felt it more appropriate to take a break from YouTubing and to focus on the development of this school. But now that it's set up, I'm quite keen to get back onto YouTube.
Yeah, you rebooted the channel, but it's great to do because I would always watch your stuff, and it was like there's always good bits and pieces of you would put some shows on there and different shows that have esoteric meanings to them, so it was always hints of knowledge that you would leave on your channel, just drop it in. But I want to get into maybe your description first so we can understand like what you're about, because what you're doing is aligned, right? It's aligned to the fourth way and Gurdjieff and all these practices. So I'll type in the comments your bio here so people can read it out.
Sure.
But yeah, so you say it was founded on the initiative of a being, their name Belcultassi, I'm probably gonna butcher this, Belcultassi, who was then able to bring the perfecting of his higher being part to the being of a saint, eternal individual, and this higher part of his now already dwells in the holy planet, Purgator. So maybe if you want to go into that.
Sure, yeah. So I initially chose the name Belcultassi, which the name comes from Mr. Gurdjieff's book, All and Everything, the first series. And in many ways, you could say that Belcultassi represents the ideal or the idea of the initiate. So in many ways, Beelzebub, who was the main protagonist of the book, is having conversations with his grandson, and he told the story or the analogy, depends on how you want to take it, almost like a myth, that Belcultassi was literally the first initiate, and that he was able to figure out ways of going back through his own timeline and repairing all of the extraneously caused vibrations that have affected him, because he had a realization that something wasn't quite right with this world and something wasn't quite right with himself in this world. And when he had that realization, it wasn't just a case of him projecting out into the world saying, well, if we could fix the world, I would be fine. He realized that to fix the world, he had to fix himself. So it was almost like a symbiotic realization of the inner and outer worlds. And so in many ways, Belcultassi represents a world where we live, where there's an inner chamber, like an inner existence, and then there's an external reality which is full of extraneously caused vibrations, and those external vibrations can come in and affect your inner world. For the most part, we're controlled by external extraneously caused vibrations. So when in the fourth way we talk about man or humans being like a machine or a machine, we have to first of all look at the definition of a machine. Definition of a machine is a apparatus that has an external control. So the machine is not internally controlled. So that is the condition of a human. So humans, although they think that they're self-governing, for the most part, they live under the law of accident and of external forces, impulses, shocks, vibrations will come in. And that's largely because this realm was designed that way.
Yeah, so you bring up one word or two words that I think will segue into the start of also a conversation here is the first initiate. I think that's a very big word that we can unpack. To be an initiate, to be someone that's going to go inward and explore this phenomenon that's going on between the internal and the external world. So when it comes to the first initiate, if someone's going to start to be initiated into, you could say, an awakening, how would they go about in starting to be or how would they go about in their initiation? How would they approach making the jump or making the shift into a new way of seeing things?
Mhm. Okay, so as an example, the moment one realizes one is like a machine, only then you can start to not be a machine. For as long as we have the illusion or delusion that we're not a machine or like a machine, we won't try to do anything about it. So being an initiative, you could say, is having an initiation, being self-initiated. So the impulse comes from the will, from the inner. It's not just some random vibration that's floating past and causes you some friction and makes you triggered and creates a reaction or an impulse. So one of the most important things within the fourth way is that we practice struggling with the habit of immediately expressing unpleasant emotions as one. So every day-to-day trigger, or we all have our personal irritations. So there's always certain things that will irritate us. So that basically means that we're controlled by these external forces. There's a classic one where, for instance, if you see a group of grown men or adults and a mouse runs across the floor, there's a high chance they're all going to jump up on the table and the chairs and start screaming. It makes no sense at all. But it's some kind of trigger or impulse that can make a grown man behave in such a way.
Oh yeah. For me, it's been roaches, man. They get me. But I know that I jump and then I start to slow down and then like get control. And then now my fear is definitely dwindled over stuff like that.
I mean, think about it.
About that.
If a fully grown man is confronted by a mouse, I mean, what is the mouse really going to do? But we have this kind of,
That's true. It's just in your mind.
yeah, we have this impulse to react to an external force or stimulation. We use the analogy or situation of a mouse just to all highlight the absurdity of how much ordinarily we're under the impulse of external forces. Yeah, going back to the point of being an initiate, so there's a number of things, and it is very tricky because by definition, to be an initiate, we have to be self-initiated. By definition, the whole point of being an initiate is that you can self-initiate. But the problem is, if ordinarily, if ordinarily we're like a machine and we don't have will or self-initiation, how do we get it? We're stuck.
So when it comes to the first initiate, they learn how to see, right? Or they're going through this process, they're learning how to see, they're learning what to pay attention to, if you will. How do you know what to pay attention to, and when you pay attention, what brings forth the most fruits?
Okay, well, I mean, there's quite a lot to unpack. If only I could give a very simple, quick answer. Okay, so we need to kind of take it back a few steps. So in terms of reaching the level of the initiate, to be self-initiated, when I talk about initiation, I'm talking about self-initiation. I'm not referring to going to some kind of mass or group or secret society where they do some kind of ritual on you. When I refer to initiation, I'm referring to self-initiation. It's initiation process that you go through with yourself. Now, there's a few things we have to understand about the basic makeup of a human. So you're familiar with the work in terms of the centers, so of the three brain beings. I generally go with the Gurdjieff model rather than the Ouspensky. I try to keep it as simple as possible. Now, if we look at the three centers, the intellect, the emotions, and the moving center, as the three fundamental brains, the problem that we have ordinarily for the uninitiated is that there's no fusion. There's no real connection between the three centers. The three centers operate independently in their own, doing their own thing in their own way, and in many ways they react to each other, and we have what's known as a wrong work of centers. So the first thing we do is we just simply observe. We observe the mechanisms, the mechanical nature of our existence. And this may take 2 or 3 years. This is a process of self-observation, just simply observing how easily we are controlled by external or extraneously caused vibrations, aka triggers. Now, if you look at marketing and media, and they are the greatest occultists of all time, because they understand how humans function. They understand how to control and manipulate by using externally caused vibrations to affect the decision making of a human, and to play around with that. It's social engineering. They're almost the masters of this. So what we're doing, we're actually going against this. So humans, whether they like it or not, are going to be hypnotized. The ordinary state is on the level of being hypnotized. Now, when the choice is that we either hypnotize by an external force, or we self-hypnotize. And the first stages of that is the fusion of the three centers. So we have the active of the intellect, the passive of the moving center, and the neutrality of the emotional center. Now, we can't really do a lot with the emotional center because it's too quick. So each center has different speeds. The emotions are too quick. This is why if we struggle with being emotionally triggered, we'll lose every time, because the emotional center is too quick for us. It's too quick for the intellect. So, for instance, if I said to you, change the way you feel about something, it's very difficult. Let's say you've had your heart broken, or there's some kind of emotional problem. And if I say, change the way you feel, you can't do it. If I said, change the way you think, you've got some chance of changing. But if I say to you, change the way you are sitting, change your posture, it's quite easy, because it's the passive aspect of our function. Yeah, so that is the starting point. So we have the active, which is the mind. We all know about the monkey mind. The activity is almost out of control. It's so active. So what we do is we take the active aspect of our mind, and we use it to connect to the passive or the denying force aspect of the body. The body is very passive, and in many ways, it's like a bit like a dog. It's looking for a leader. It's looking to be told what to do. So it might sound like I'm talking nonsense, whatever, to someone that's not used to this sort of thing. But
that all makes sense. I think anyone can get that.
Yeah, I mean, we can all practice it right now. So, for instance, if I say change the way you feel, how would you go about it? You can't take your feelings and change them. I mean, there might be some, but we can't do it quickly. But if I said now, put your hands on your head, or put your hands on your hips, or hold your arms out straight or out to the side, it's instant. So that means that the active element of our being has the power and the will to command the passive aspect. Now, ordinarily, the mind is so active it's out of control, hence the monkey mind. But what we can do, we can use the passivity of the body to slow down the mind, to bring some kind of peace to the mind. Now, when I first got into the fourth way, I spoke to my teacher and I said, "Oh, I want to learn all about the astral body. I want to get out of my body." And my teacher said, "Look, Lee, you got it all wrong." And I was like, "What do you mean I got it all wrong? I thought this was all about the astral body, the astral body and floating in the astral realms." He said, "No, you're not in your body. You need to get in your body." He said, "The problem with you is that you're not in your body." And that's true for most people, is that they're not actually in their body. So we always have this thing about, can you sense your feet? So even right now, anybody listening, can you sense your feet, or have you lost contact with your feet? And I'm talking conscious contact with your feet. So of course everybody will say, yeah, I can sense my feet. But no, can you really sense your feet? Now, if you can sense your feet, if you can consciously sense your feet, that makes you immune to being triggered. You can only be triggered once you lose contact with your moving center, with the physical planetary body. So it acts as like an anchor. But without going too deep into it, within this realm, humans, we're born in thirds. So we have our intellect, our physical planetary body, and our emotional world. But there's one part that is governed by the moon. So a planetary body is actually under the control of the moon. Now, when you sense your feet, when you sense your body, when you have a full sensation of your physical moving center, it's like you're reclaiming it back from the moon. You're the moon is like a surrogate parent to that 1/3 of your makeup. By gaining the sensation of the body, starting with the feet and then working our way up, we then take ourselves out of the power and control of the moon, which is also part of self-initiation, because ordinarily the moon has way too much control over us to be self-initiated.
It ties it into our mechanicalness, right?
Yeah, the moon is like the weight of the pendulum on a clock. But the moon is not all bad. I mean, it's got a bad rep, but it's not all bad.
It's got a bad rep. Yeah, there's some movies out there. There's some movies out there, you know.
But in many ways we are dependent on the moon. So for instance, the moon is responsible for our instinctive aspect. So without the moon, we wouldn't have the luxury of having our heartbeat and our breath and our internal organs functioning automatically. So there are some benefits to being like a machine. Imagine like if you forget to beat your heart, then you just fall down and die. So there are some benefits to being like a machine. So I think it's a good time to create this differentiation to being a machine or being like a machine. So to the uninitiated, then you're a machine. To the initiate, then you're like a machine. You then start to own a machine. You become the operator of the machine, as opposed to just being a machine. And in many ways, for those who have studied Ouspensky, and especially in Search of the Miraculous, he was very much kind of into fixing the operator, whereas Gurdjieff was more like a mechanic. He would try to fix the machine and the energetics of the machine, so that the operator has a good machine to operate.
Yeah. And part of too in your video you mentioned is how our likes, our dislikes, it's kind of what keeps us, like the way that we see ourselves is in only relation to our likes, our dislikes is only in relation to, our self-centeredness. So we have no idea how to see really outside of ourselves, other than like we don't have a way to measure ourselves, if you will. So you kind of hint a little bit on that in your video when you talk about self-initiation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
can you go into this idea of measuring yourself, like, and yeah, that whole idea of measuring yourself, how we tend to see ourselves in a self-centered way,
Mm,
and we have no real clue on how to really measure who we are,
mm.
because how we do it is in a very selfish way. So can you go maybe into detail about that too when it comes to initiation?
Yeah. Well, one of the chief enemies to self-remembering, self-consciousness, is identification. So the state of identification is almost like a form of moon worship. When we're identified, we no longer exist. And this goes back to this symbiotic relationship between the inner or the inner witness or the observer and external phenomena. You've heard of the term divided attention. So
Yeah.
we through the work, we try to find balance so we're not taken. Now we've excuse me, we've all had these situations where we've maybe tried to be conscious, either walking to work or driving, and then all of a sudden it's like we wake up and we can't remember where we were, especially if we got triggered. So something caused us to react, often in a negative way, or it could be in a nice way. So likes and dislikes. We find that we suddenly appear, and we were like, "Well, where was I? How did I even get here? I disappeared." So what we try to do through the work and the work of the initiate is to create some kind of reconciling force. This is what we would term as the third world or the third force. So for the uninitiated, they would be seen as third force blind. For the initiate, they try to maintain a state of living in the third world. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the term third world is almost derogatory, whereas in the work, it's what we're striving for. We're striving to live in the third world.
Yeah. Let's take let's take some time to read some comments real quick. We see gotta catch up a little bit right here. So we got Donna says, "Hey Lee and Ezekiel, good to see you both on here together." And then you also got Helen saying, "Hey guys, good to see you here." Well, good to see you as well. And let's see. Today I've been using posture and movement to remind myself of Gurdjieff's stop exercise. Thinking if someone said stop and I got stuck in this position, how would it feel? So I changed my posture. Yeah, that's a good, yeah. Do you want to explain what this exercise is and go into a little bit of detail, like for people that don't know what Gurdjieff stop exercise is?
Yeah, well, the stop exercise is highly controversial. I think Gurdjieff had quite a bit of fun with some of his students. There are various stories. I'm not sure how true they are, of people being in very precarious positions or situations, and he would call the stop exercise. But basically, in a nutshell, the stop exercise is where you don't know when it's coming, so it has to be somebody else. You can't use the stop exercise on yourself. It has to be somebody else to catch you out. So as you're in mid-flow, the call stop, and then you have to stop. So whatever it is you're doing, you have to stop, and you can't move until you're released from that. Now, the idea is that it gives you a chance to see the mechanics, the momentum of the mechanics, and how powerful the momentum of the mechanics that we're under, and the level of hypnosis, and you could say the power of the moon that is running through us at any given moment. So yeah, so because for instance, if you say to somebody you're a machine or you're like a machine, people react. I'm not a machine. I'm conscious. I'm awake. People are very offended if you
Yeah.
call them a machine. But in reality,
Yeah.
we are like a machine. And the
Yeah.
stop
I mean, that's
exercise
hard to
is to expose that.
well, it is hard to grasp because if you're just a normal civilian and all you're told is like, all you're told is like, do good, be responsible about your life, go after what your passions are, do what you need to do, raise a family, all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't think this fits in anywhere near something like that. I think there is a lot of people that live lives like that. You know what I mean? Like they'll just That's all there is to them. They do it. They have their little they have their likes and dislikes. They have hobbies, places like to travel, you know, have a job. And then when it comes to stopping and saying, whoa, like, okay, there's something strange going on. Like, you don't see how you're asleep, these kind of ideas. I don't think it's, for most people, that's kind of hard to grasp because you learned in school, you've been certified, you've been credited about your work, you've been given credit, all that kind of stuff. I think it's a lot of things can reinforce, like you mentioned, like a lot of things can reinforce your sleep or reinforce, you can hypnotize yourself quick. So that's interesting. Interesting. You mentioned that.
Yeah, the Gurdjieff would often describe the main problem with contemporary humans is the education from childhood. So it's how basically we've been programmed and to see life in a topsy-turvy way. And the things that we should try to work against are often promoted, and the things that we should work for are ignored. I always say to people, whatever you didn't learn at school, you should really focus on, or whatever they didn't teach you at school, you should try to focus on, because there's probably some wisdom or knowledge in there. Because the education system is not for us. You have to remember that the education system is not for us.
So do you think education should be self-initiated, or like what is just an opinion around like education, right? Do you think the parents should help the kid initiate their own learning? Like how would that go about in terms of getting someone to learn and trust in, you could say, higher centers?
Well, I think first of all, we need to have a better understanding of the apparatus or the anatomy, the real anatomy of a human being, and the function. So if you look at the media, it's always on about the dysfunction of society. That's mostly because there was no education given of how to be functional. So as an example, what I spoke about with the active intellect and the passive nature of the planetary body, nobody ever told us that we meant to fuse them. And when you fuse them, you create an equilibrium with the emotional center, which is the reconciling force, which will give you 3 parts. So we're living as a whole. So so here's an example. When we make decisions, one of the fundamental problems that we have when we make a decision, so some people will say, I'm not going to smoke anymore, but they'll be sitting down when they make that decision. So it'll be like an intellectual decision or even an emotional decision not to smoke anymore. Then when they get up, walk across the room, they pick up a cigarette and start smoking. Why? Because the body wasn't informed. The body wasn't part of that decision. It was made by the intellect or the emotions. Because we're living in parts. So if you really want to stop smoking, you really need to inform all 3 centers or all brains, not just one brain. So even the term 3-brain being is very revealing. Now, in ordinary education, we're not really taught in that way. We're taught that we have like a brain in the head, and that's it.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why we wonder why we struggle with habits. Now, habits are just programs. So as I said, the media and the marketing industry, they're very good at implanting habits, and we don't have any defense against it because we only have one center at a time, when we have the potential to have all 3 centers. And when we have all 3 centers, we have what is known as the third force of the third world, the completion.
Yeah.
Of the triad.
And so another thing you mentioned too is paying, like the way that we think that everything is deserved or owed to us. Our opinion of ourselves can sometimes be too high. And so you talk about this idea of paying, and that you receive based on how much you give. So what is this whole concept of paying come in terms of when you first get initiated? Where does this concept come in?
Well, life itself, we're indebted. We have a debt. We're duty bound to pay it back to creation, to the larger reality system, or to the absolute. You know, we're not here for ourselves, and this is one of the fundamental problems when it comes to finding happiness, because we're not the bad news is we're not actually created for our own pleasure. We're created for a purpose. We're here to work. Now, for anybody that doubts that, try to live in this realm without working. There's a lot of misconceptions about this realm. This realm is not necessarily such a good place in terms of the ray of creation. We're only one stop away from the worst place, the lowest place, which is the moon. So you know about the 96 laws of the moon and 48 laws of Earth realm and 24.
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, so there's a system of laws. Now, some people will say, yeah, there's 48 laws and these are the laws of this realm. I don't think it means that at all. It's just a number that's given to give you some so that you can take that knowledge, put it into your being, and have some understanding of it and some comparison. So we say that the moon is under 96 laws, the Earth realm is under 48, and the sun is 24. So we're in the middle. So if you're more mechanical, if you're uninitiated, you're going to be under more laws. For those that are initiated, self-initiated, they're under less laws. The objective is to be under less laws. Now, the only problem with being under less laws is that it requires a greater level of responsibility. The whole point of laws is to produce a form of mechanism and mechanical life so that it can be organized by an external force, as in laws. When you take away these external laws, it means you're more dependent on your internal will, or the ability to be self-initiated, or to have initiative using the will. So you're either going to go towards the moon of 96, where you have no will at all, or you're going to be moving closer towards less laws, where it requires more will. You have to make the decisions. You have to have responsibility. And this is an area that is really misunderstood. And without this understanding, it would be very hard to find true happiness or contentment in many ways.
Yeah. And so another topic you bring up is organic and psychic impulses. This is a very interesting topic, because I think when I've observed myself, I've been starting to see what that means more and more in terms of like something psychic versus like all of a sudden my emotions, my impulses, like I want to do something about what I feel all of a sudden and act on it. And so when we start to move into this realm of organic and psychic impulses, I think you begin to talk about how, you know, organic impulses, when they come up, it's unintentional.
Yeah.
When a psychic impulse comes, it's intentional.
Yeah.
So can you go into like, what does that mean, that an organic impulse is unintentional versus a psychic impulse, which is intentional? Can you break that down?
Yeah, well, in order to truly understand this, then you have to understand at least a little bit about the cosmology of the fourth way. And without a cosmology, we're pretty much lost. So when we talk about cosmology, we're not just talking about planets and stuff. We're actually talking about like our real purpose as to why we're here. And where are we? You know, what is this place? Can this place be fixed? So within the work, we kind of have this understanding that this place is actually functioning perfectly as it was designed. This place is not to be fixed. It's almost like a seed in a plant pot trying to fix the soil and the plant pot, when in reality, it's destined to a far greater place, which is outside of the soil and the plant pot. So within the fourth way, we see this as a place where we have an opportunity to develop will and have the ability to coat a higher being body, which would be the equivalent of a flower or plant of some sort outside of the plant pot. So we don't particularly try to fix this place. We simply observe it, and we see that it actually functions and works exactly how it was designed. It's designed to be troublesome. It's designed to manifest extraneously caused vibrations. Every time we're confronted with this friction of an external vibration, we have the opportunity to do the work. So in some ways, it's a blessing. Now, going back to the point of organic and psychic, once again, we're led to believe that if it's organic, it must be good. But in reality, nature and the organic aspect of nature has its own agenda. Nature doesn't care whether you produce a higher being body. If anything, it wants you to be food for the moon. It wants you to produce certain substances to be part of the food chain, to feed the moon. Now, we're living in a food chain. Life eats life. For as long as we're living in a food chain, there'll never be justice. It will never be fair. One thing has to consume another. So the whole notion of, because it's, it's organic or it's natural, it must be good. Well, no, try living in the wilderness. You'll be eaten alive. And there's nothing, excuse me, there's nothing in nature that will help you. I mean, you could jump off the edge of a cliff. There's nothing in nature that's going to bring some kind of super wind that's going to come down and lift you up and save you. Nature doesn't care for your existence. Nature only cares about developing you up to a certain point, and ultimately you be food for the moon. What we try to do as an initiate is that we become food for the angels, or we become food for higher worlds, not lower worlds. So the whole notion of the work is very unnatural. We're going against nature by doing the work. And we don't produce so much food for the moon. We produce food for angels or higher worlds. But when we produce food for higher worlds, we actually produce food that goes into reciprocation. It's not like a predator-prey type of relationship.
How hard can that struggle be to resist against nature? Like, at what point did you realize maybe like, oh crap, like this work that I'm doing here? Yeah, it's a lot of work. Like, at what point did it become like that? Or did it become like that? How was your experience?
No, I think it's an ongoing process. I don't think we're ever fully released from nature, because we're living in the natural world. Now, I'm not saying nature is bad. I'm just saying that we don't really have a good understanding. We may have knowledge of nature, but we don't have an understanding of nature. When I was a child, my favorite subject was biology. And I never realized at the time, but there's a reason. I always remember being taught about the food chain. That was literally like a defining moment in my childhood, was when the teacher taught me about the food chain and that life eats life, and the reciprocal nature of and maintenance of nature and life, and how one thing is dependent on another for its survival and all of that stuff. And then as I grew up, and whenever I encountered problems, I always used to default back to my biology lessons and always consider the food chain and how life eats life. And pretty much that will explain most of your problems that you'll encounter on a day-to-day basis. Because all you're doing, you're encountering life eating life. So even if somebody doesn't like you, or somebody's trying to cause a problem against you, that'll just because they're trying to survive at your expense. It's nothing personal. It's just how it is, because we're living in a realm where life eats life. That's nature. That's organic. That's natural. Now, to go against that means that we become, well, that's the true definition of psychic, because we're using our consciousness to actually consciously go against nature in many ways, because nature wants us to survive. And this takes us back to the three brains. And this is a very important point. So our three brains, the intellect, the moving center or the planetary body, and the emotions, are there for our survival on a planetary level. That's it. Once we get to the level of fusing the three centers, they're almost like steps. So they will be the 3 steps to the 4th way. So my esoteric group is called the Omnipresent Platform, or Omni Platform. So once we get to a fusion of 3 centers, we then get to the 4th way, the level of the fourth center, the unification of the 3. And that's where the psychic starts. That's where conscious will starts. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with Gurdjieff's teaching with regards to the conscious shocks, or the first conscious shock being missing, which is self-remembering. So humans ordinarily don't self-remember.
Yeah. No, I was just say, like, I'm somewhat familiar with the concept, but I think I've seen enough or experienced enough to where I think I understand what you mean by self-remembering. I haven't necessarily studied specifically from a certain Gurdjieff group, but I've been around people that have practiced it, and then they've taught me. And therefore, when it comes to remembering yourself, I get a feel or a sense of what that means.
I mean, it's more of a concept, and for the most part, we can only really understand it by what we're not, to the degree that we don't self-remember. So Gurdjieff famously said to Ouspensky, "Go away, self-remember, come back and tell me the results." Ouspensky tried to self-remember, I think it's 2 or 3 years or something. He came back to Gurdjieff, and Gurdjieff said, "Well, what was the results?" And Ouspensky said, I cannot remember myself." And then at that point, Gurdjieff says, "Now you know very much." So it's almost like learning by negation.
Yeah, negation is a very powerful principle. Something I think most of us don't apply to our lives because of that, again, initial thing to identify. What was interesting, though, is that in that video, you talked about separating your head from, I believe, I forget which aspect of yourself, but I think it's from the organic impulses. Like your head has to be separate from organic impulses. Can you break that down? Like, what do you mean by, your head being separate? Or what do you mean by head, first off?
Well,
and then why do you separate it from organic impulses, or how do you go about knowing that you can separate yourself from that?
Yeah, this is where the work, it can be a little bit tricky, especially in the beginning. But so as an example, we talk about fusion, we talk about blending of the centers, okay? But before we can do that, we have to self-observe the separation. We actually have to separate our centers, and we have to have a clear observation of the separation of centers before we can reconnect them. So a lot of it is down to language. So when we talk about development and transformation, there's a difference between development and transformation. Most people will conflate the two. They don't understand the difference. So within the work, when we talk about development, we're talking about the rearranging, the organizing of what you already have. So it's almost a precursor to transformation. To go straight into transformation, you're destined to fail. And you'll see this all the time when people are like, "Oh, I'm going to we'll see it in January. I'm going to transform my life."
Let's see it in January.
But what we really need for transformation is the reorganization of what we already have. So we already have 3 brains. So we just need to reorganize them so that there's some stability. within our centers. Then we can look at the transformation process. So the transformation starts once you get to the fourth level. So we've got the moving center, emotional center, intellectual center, and then we've got the fourth way. The fourth way is where it starts. It's the start once we've had the stability, reorganization, and development of the lower three centers. And just to make a very important point about the lower three centers, the lower three centers are literally our survival tools, our defense mechanisms for this realm, for the natural organic world. So the moving center is responsible for the fight or the flight. So we either move towards a threat or run away from a threat. They're very basic survival mechanisms. Now, over time, we've been able to dress it up to make it look like we're civilized. But in reality, when push comes to shove, when we're in fear or there's a threat, we will go to our default of survival. So the planetary body or the moving center is to run forwards or run away. Maybe not literally, but it could be more as a concept. Now, the emotional center is designed to give us highs and lows. So the moving center moves forwards and back. The emotional center takes us up and down. Not only that, in terms of survival and defense, we can use our moving center to make others run away, or we can attract. We can equally use the emotional world for our own highs and lows, and we are very good at putting other people down or picking them up. We get to control, we get to benefit by controlling other people's emotions. And when it comes to the intellect is responsible for the left and right hemispheres. So we can go forwards and back, up and down, left and right. Now, when you see people in conflict, when you see people in competition, all it is the playing out of the lower three centers. It's the lower worlds. It's the world of survival. It's the world of the food chain. It's the world of life eating life. It's nothing personal. This is how the world is. And it was designed perfectly for that. The organic world is exactly that. Just go out into nature and observe one creature destroying another. Go into the town or the cities and look at humans doing the same thing. It's just that we dress it up. It just looks a lot prettier, but it's the same thing in the workplace, in the office space. People want promotion. People, if you watch people driving, they want to get in front. They want to be, I don't need to go into too much detail to get people to understand that we're living in a competitive food chain.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is voodoo. This is voodoo. This is witchcraft. This is black magic. Everybody does it all day, every day. But because we don't call it that. Sometimes we might just put it down to the rat race or the corporate animal. All these terms that we have. It's to camouflage the food chain of life eating life, of one center eating another center. And not only that, we have an internal food chain where one center will eat another center.
And so one thing you mentioned too is how, okay, so if you're to get clear on a definition by what you mean on separating your head, right, or the word head, you're saying it's like your intellect? Is that what you're saying the head is?
Or we could say the active element of our being mentation.
Active element.
So
would you say attention, or would you say?
Yeah, I would put attention in with that. Also, the ability to be responsible, to have some kind of logic and reason. So we need the active aspect of our intellect. We can't just be emotional. We can't just be physical. In many ways, the active element of the intellect, by definition, means it has to lead, but not at the expense of the rest. Like I say, what we start with in terms of self-initiation And you can actually move closer to self-initiation by doing one thing, and that's directing the positive, affirming aspects of the intellect and the attention and direct it into the passive, denying aspect of the feet or the body. And once you have that connection, then you have the early stages of an initiation. The meeting of the active and the passive, the higher and the lower. When the higher connects with the lower, then the center or the middle can be actualized. So, I said earlier about trying to control your emotions or trying to do anything with your emotions. You can't, because the emotions are kind of scattered. They're almost intangible. But what we can do in terms of self-initiation is the attention, the affirming force. The attention always wants to do something. The attention always wants to go and do something. Most of the time it's passive, so it just gets taken by whatever passes by. What we're doing is taking our affirming attention and directing it, giving it a job. We direct it into the passivity of the body, of the feet.
Self-employed.
Yeah. We give the head a job to do, and it's happy to do it, and it'll be of service. Now, I spent many years trying to meditate, and I couldn't meditate because you could say that my affirming force or my active mind is too active for meditation. It would just drive me nuts. And I was always told, oh, just ignore the mind or just whatever, yeah. But my mind, the more I try to ignore it, the more it screams. It wasn't until I came across the fourth way, and I was taught to direct and to use and to channel that affirming force of the mind, or sorry, not the mind, but the head brain, intellectual brain, and direct it into the passivity. It's almost like putting it into a calm bath where it can relax, and it still has a purpose. So you got to trick it.
Yeah.
We would class this as part of the psychic aspect. So the psychic aspect. So what I'm describing now isn't organic at all. We're going against the organic nature. We're creating a hack, almost like a short circuit. And when we do that, then the emotional world, by its own volition, will equalize, and you'll find a sense of peace.
Yeah. So you also talk about making the head a watchman, if you will. Can you go into detail, like what is that to be the head to become a watchman?
Yeah, more like the observer.
Observer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So self-observation. So, I mean, we can use observation in many different ways. So the fundamental of self-observation is observing yourself. So, excuse me, sensing the body is a form of observation. Observing the posture. So right now, anybody that's listening or watching, simply observe your posture. What is your posture doing? Where are you in terms of, where is your posture in terms of the time and space? Was you even aware of a posture? We can observe our body temperature. We can observe the density or the weight of the body. We can observe the temperature of the room, the ambient temperature of the room around the body. So all we're doing is kind of expanding our observation. So then we can observe ourselves in terms of how are we when we're confronted with extraneously caused vibrations. So one of the tricks, not tricks, but one of the techniques that Gurdjieff would often use was that he would hold meetings in very busy cafes intentionally because of all the distractions, because he wanted to encourage those engaged in the fourth way to be able to do like a form of meditation in real life, because the fourth way is to take place in life. Because it's no good being able to, I mean, I've done it many times. I remember when I was maybe 19 years old, I used to go to the local Buddhist temple, and I'd sit with the Buddhist monks and meditate for a couple of hours, and I'd have amazing experiences. But then I'd jump into my car and drive home, and probably halfway I'd be in some kind of road rage.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's like everything is 2-hour training just
Gone. Yeah.
out the window. That's happened to me too. And continuing to stay in that watchful state, you know, eventually you understand your response to something, and then you can slow it down, like how you mentioned, by just like seeing the body's like immobility, like how it's not moving. You can get your attention in your body, and you're like, oh, okay. You can then start to slow down a little bit. Just a quick thing. If anyone has any questions for Lee or for myself, go ahead and drop a question now in the comment section. We can answer some of your guys' comments, stuff like that. Yeah, because I want to get to
you're giving guarantees to that.
No guarantees. No guarantees. But if we still obliged to answer, yeah. But so yeah, that paying attention, observing, you mentioned that there's many different things you can start to watch, and then eventually it leads to more of an opening. Or at least that's what it sounds like to me. And so
so in the end, we're trying to, in many ways, the end game is to create an equilibrium between the inner and outer attention. So there's a balance. For those who are not aware, within the fourth way, we don't just talk about one type of food. We talk about, there's 3 fundamental different types of food. There's the food that we eat. There's the air that we breathe. But the most important food in this food chain is the impressions that we receive and the perceptions that we receive. Now, we only truly can feed upon those impressions when we're not identified, when there is somebody at home to receive the impressions. Because all the time, the extraneously caused vibrations are drawing our attention out into the world, into this, into that. This is my pet hatred for sort of like either conspiracy or truther movements, is that they're obsessed with it's this, it's that, it's look over here, look over there, look in the sky, look anywhere other than oneself. So the kind of conspiracy industrial complex is actually orchestrated intentionally to block people from doing the work under the guise that they're doing something. But all it is you heard of doom looping, yeah?
Doom looping? No, I've not heard of that.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of like a condition where people become obsessed. They become obsessed with bad news, and the media is there to provide
bad
the
news bears. Yeah.
So by doing the work, we then there has to be somebody at home to receive the impressions, and because that's the highest form of food, it offers nourishment for the mechanism, for the machine. Gurdjieff, so for instance, Ouspensky, he often spoke about it being a psychological problem of humanity, whereas Gurdjieff, he was very clear that it's an energetic problem. The reason why we can't self-remember is because we don't have the energy as fuel, because it requires a particular type of energy to self-remember. And self-remembering isn't just about like being self-aware, self-conscious, although it is part of that. Self-remembering is also remembering the purpose, why we're here, where we're going. So when we self-remember, we're remembering that we're developing a higher being body.